بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا اللهم يسر لنا اليسرى وجنبنا العسرى واجمع لنا بين خيري الدنيا والأخرى أما بعد. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beneficial knowledge, to always grant us steadfastness and sincerity in seeking knowledge and acting upon it. Inshallah ta'ala, today we'll continue. The last time we talked about ghusl, we talked about wudu and ghusl, what requires or makes ghusl mandatory. Today inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue on the pillars of ghusl. Hopefully today there'll be no diagrams or anything like that. So on page, I think 15, he says, pillars of ghusl. So the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, and ghusl has two pillars. So explain what ghusl is. Ghusl is basically the religious bath or shower, or whatever you like to call it. And we mentioned the 6 things that make ghusl mandatory. Okay, now ghusl has 2 pillars. We mentioned wudu has how many pillars? Has 6. Okay, so here ghusl only 2, very simple. He says number 1, the intention. So the first pillar of ghusl is intention, just like wudu, just like any act of worship, you need intention first. What to intend? He says, الطهارة للصلاة أو رفع الحدث, to make purification for prayer. So that's number 1. Or you can intend to lift major hadath, or anything like that, such as raf'ul janaba, lifting janaba, or etc. Any other similar intention. And he says by heart. Okay, as we mentioned, the intention is done by heart. Now, when do you make the intention? We mentioned in wudu, you make the intention as you wash the face, which is the first pillar in wudu. What about ghusl when making the religious bath? He says, while washing the first part of the body. Okay, so as you're under the shower, for example, if you have a shower, or if you're grabbing, scooping from a bucket, then the first, water that comes on, you make the intention. You stand under the shower, you make the intention. That's when the ghusl starts. Okay. Then the author, he says, therefore, any part that is washed before the intention is invalid. So if you stood under the shower and your body is already wet and you haven't made the intention yet, once you make the intention, that's when the ghusl starts. So everything that was wet before the intention must be washed again. Okay, hence, it must be washed again after the intention. Pretty straightforward. Number 2, he says, to make the water reach every part of the body, its skin and hair. So in ghusl, the main pillar, number 1 is intention. Number 2 is to make sure the water reaches every skin and hair in the body, on the human body. Okay. So you make sure you get your head wet if you have thick hair, especially long hair. Right. If you have a beard, make sure the water gets inside. We mentioned in wudu, if a person has thick beard, it is sufficient to wipe or wash the outside. However, in ghusl here, in the shower, the water must reach inside the skin and the beard must be all wet. Okay. And then he says, therefore, it is obligatory to wash the inside of any thick hair. And he says, and it is obligatory to wash what is apparent from one's ear. So we must make sure the water reaches everything. And now the author is mentioning parts that are usually missed. For example, is the ears. Right? You make sure the ears, the inside here, is all the water reaches there. Thick hair, as the author mentioned, if you have long hair, the beard as well. For example, if a person has, what do you call it? Big belly, for example, it folds up, right? Make sure the water gets in there, the belly button. And the author will mention some more. He says, and what is apparent from the buttock and around it while excrement. So if someone is sitting down or crouching down, that part which is apparent during istinja, during a person cleaning himself from the toilet, right? That which is apparent as well must be washed. Okay, and this is very important because usually when standing, it's missed under the shower. Okay. And then he says, and what is apparent from a woman's private part when she sits on her feet. So same principle. And then the inside of a prepuce and under it for the uncircumcised. Basically, the author, rahimahullah, by mentioning all of this, the ears, the thick hair, and all of this, he's mentioning the main points that are usually missed during ghusl. Even the one who is uncircumcised, the inside of the prepuce must be washed. Okay. And then he says, so the water must flow naturally on all these mentioned. As we previously mentioned many times, what is the meaning of wash? To wash is to make the water drip and flow. Okay. Removing najis, impurities, making wudu. Also here in ghusl, you must use an amount of water where the water flows naturally on the skin. So from here we know that it's not obligatory to rub the skin. Okay, so if a person stands under the rain, under a shower, and he makes the intention of ghusl or removing the major hadath, it's sufficient as long as his whole body is wet. He doesn't have to rub. However, it is recommended to rub to make sure that the water reaches the armpits and everywhere else where the water usually doesn't reach. So that's briefly regarding ghusl. Is there any questions before we move on?
Yeah,
Yes,
so two questions.
Yes, Father.
So can we start making the intention before entering the toilet?
Okay, so we mentioned the definition of intention, right?
Yeah.
As the scholars mentioned, قصد الشيء مقترنا بفعله. So to mean something, that you want to do something while engaging in it, while you're starting to engage in it. Does that make sense? Because if you intend to do something before that, such as walking to the masjid for salah, that is called azm in Arabic. It's not niyyah. Okay, it's azm. It's a will to do something later on, but you haven't engaged in it. Okay, that's different from niyyah. Okay, so why is this important? As we will learn in salah, some people, they come to the saf, they walk, and they're still thinking about something, and they just say naturally because they're used to Allahu Akbar. Right? And then after a few seconds, they realize they're in salah. They might be like, is this dhuhr or asr? Okay. This is why the scholars mention intention is when you engage in something. So as you say Allahu Akbar, you make sure that the intention that I'm going to pray dhuhr is in your mind and heart. So this makes sure when you make wudu, you actually wash the face with the intention of wudu. You're not imagining or thinking about something, and without realizing you finish the wudu. Okay, so this is the definition of intention, as the scholars mentioned, and why it's important. The intention should be done while engaging in the action.
Yeah, because the idea is I've already prepared for it. I've taken my towel and I need to go to the toilet.
Yes, that's true.
Take a
Yes.
shower. So before I start that, once I enter into the toilet,
Yes.
I just make an intention that I'm gonna do ghusl. So that's,
Yes.
that's okay.
So, I believe some scholars mentioned that's okay. Okay, but to my knowledge, especially according to the Shafi'i school, as we mentioned, the definition of intention is from the Arabic language as well, because we derive rulings not only from the Quran and Sunnah. Quran and Sunnah is in Arabic, so we must look at the Arabic. How did they use it, the Arabs? Okay, so the intention is when you start to engage in something. As you engage in it, so when you're traveling, you say, I want to travel in 2 weeks. That's called azm in Arabic. But when you're grabbing your baggage, you're walking out of your house, you're at the airport, that means you're already engaging in it. That's the niyyah. Okay, so there's slight difference. Okay, and this is very important.
Okay. Then the second question is,
Yes.
when I'm doing ghusl and it's over, do I still need to take wudu before prayers?
Okay, so there's a difference between scholars. However, in the Shafi'i school, it's sufficient. Okay, so the ghusl removes the minor and major hadath. The minor and major hadath by ghusl on. Okay, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Any other questions before?
There's I don't know, something that I know that you have to make wudu first before ghusl.
Yeah, so yes, that's a very good question. So wudu before ghusl. So as we mentioned here, the pillars of ghusl are only two: intention and make sure the water reaches every skin and hair. However, this is the minimum requirement for ghusl. Okay, we mentioned the minimum required for wudu. Also, we mentioned about salah. However, the best way to make ghusl is to wash the private part first, wash your hands, make wudu, and then make your hands wet, put it through your hair, and then put water on your head 3 times, and etc. And then you wash from your right to the left, and so on. Okay, so there's the best way, the complete way to perform ghusl. Okay, but because of time and etc., we'll just cover the main things that you cannot miss in ghusl. That if you miss it, the ghusl or the wudu or the salah could be invalid. As for sunnah actions and etc., inshallah, we can read the books of hadith, we can refer to other lectures and etc., inshallah ta'ala.
So the minimum, we don't only use water, we don't need to use soap or anything.
No. In fact, we didn't mention this because it's not mentioned in the book, but when we say we need to remove najis or we need to do wudu, it needs to be pure water. What does pure water mean? Water in its natural state. So if water that is mixed with soap, the color of the water has changed, the smell has changed. That is not sufficient for wudu. So if you make wudu with, for example, let's say tea, you have tea. Okay, can you make wudu with tea? It's from water. No, you can't. Even though tea is pure najis. Is tea pure najis? A cup of tea.
Yeah. When you make ghusl and you touch a private part, then you break. You have to make your wudu.
No.
No?
So touching the private part during ghusl,
Yeah.
does not break ghusl. Because
No,
we
no,
mentioned
does it break your wudu?
the wudu
Yeah.
for the ghusl.
Yeah.
No.
It doesn't.
No. Because then we'll say if you touch it private, we have to make wudu again for the ghusl. Okay. And then it's never going to finish. Okay. So because this wudu is not for salah, this wudu is sunnah for ghusl. Okay. It's sunnah for ghusl. So,
But then,
yeah.
But then you have to do prayer and just make ghusl again.
no, because the ghusl removes the major and minor.
So while you make ghusl and then you touch the private part, you finish, then you can do salah.
You can do it. According to the opinion that ghusl removes the major and minor hadath. Okay, impurity, minor and major. Okay. Wallahu a'lam. Anything else? Okay. So that's the second condition for salah. Okay, these two first are very important and very heavy conditions. Number one is to remove impurities. Number two is to remove hadath, or the state of impurity. Now number three is the times of salah. Okay, the times of prayer. In the next page, inshallah ta'ala. So today we follow clocks and times, for times of prayer. But it's also important to know if we don't have access to, these phones and whatnot. So we'll try to probably... So back in the days, and you can try this inshallah tomorrow or whenever you can, if you have a good experience inshallah, is that they had a stick. Okay, you have a stick, let's say this stick is 50 centimeters, right, stick. Or if you look in some historical masjids, interesting, you find outside the masjid like a pole or a special thing standing up that's used for the time of salah. Traditionally, you find this in some old masjids, right, historically. But to know the time of salah, you need a stick or an object, basically. Let's say this is 50 centimeters. The object is 50 centimeters. So we'll start with dhuhr as the author starts. Does anyone know why the author starts with dhuhr? Why didn't he start with fajr? Or maybe maghrib? Does anyone know why?
Just for Fajr, the sun has arisen up.
Okay. So the day starts after fajr. Is that what you're saying?
Something like that.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Any other answer? Okay, so the authors or the scholars of Islam, if we look into their books, the way books of hadith and fiqh, how they put it in order is not how they want to put it just like that, right? There's always reasons and wisdom behind it. So why the reason they start with dhuhr is because the first salah that Jibreel alayhi salam came down to teach the Prophet was dhuhr prayer. Okay, so when the salah was made obligatory, and then Jibreel alayhi salam came down to teach the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam how to pray, the first prayer that they did was dhuhr, and then Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr. Okay, so that's why the authors and the scholars, they start with dhuhr, following the hadith, right? May Allah have mercy upon them. So we'll start with dhuhr first. So he says, rahimahullah, that the time of dhuhr starts min zawali shams, when the sun tilts to the west. Okay, so let's say this is the east, and this is the west. Where does the sun rise from? At the east there, inshallah. Unless it's the day of judgment. So it starts from the east. So the shadow would be in the west here. Okay. So as the sun comes up, the shadow will be long. Okay, and as it comes up higher, the shadow will be shorter until it's gone, completely gone, and the sun will be here. Okay. This is called zawal. Okay, when the sun is right in the middle of the air or the sky and there's no shade. Okay, there's no shade. Now when the sun starts to tilt to the west and there's a little bit of shadow starting to appear, that's when dhuhr starts. Okay, so when the sun is right in the middle, when it starts to tilt to the west and you see some shadow in the east, that's when dhuhr comes, that's when dhuhr starts. Okay, and as we know, this time when there's no shadow is a time of prohibition. It's impermissible to pray. No sunnah prayer, nothing. Okay, and then when the sun or the shadow starts to appear and the sun starts to tilt, that's when dhuhr starts. The dhuhr enters. Okay, so this is the first time of Salah, Dhuhr. Okay, so Dhuhr starts here. When does it finish? It finishes when Asr starts. Now, when does Asr start? The author, he says, when the shade of everything reaches its length. So how long is this stick?
Sorry,
Sorry.
question.
Yes.
You said in Zawal time, we're not supposed to do Sunnah prayer.
Yes.
So Duha stop before Zawal?
Duha. Not before Zawal, sorry. When Zawal?
When Zawal?
It's very short, like a few minutes. A few seconds. So that's Dhuhr time finish. Now when is the time of Asr? What did the author say? He says, when the shade of everything reaching its length. So how long is this stick now? 50 centimeters. So when the shadow reaches 50 centimeters as well, right, the sun is probably here, okay, that's when Asr starts and Dhuhr finishes. So Dhuhr finishes, straight away Asr starts. It's connected, okay, the time is connected. So that's when Asr starts and Dhuhr finishes. And then what about Maghrib? So Maghrib is when the sun sets, okay, when the sun sets. And when we say the sun sets, meaning the disk of the sun, so the actual sun itself, when the whole thing starts to disappear, it goes under the horizon. I think maybe some of you seen videos, the sun setting in the ocean or something. When it completely disappears, that's when Maghrib starts and Asr finishes. Okay, so that's the time for Maghrib. Okay, now Maghrib starts. So when does Maghrib finish and Isha starts? The author, he says, when the red twilight sets. Okay, so once the sun disappears, if we have the horizon here and the sun disappears, we still have the ray or the sunlight, okay, the lights from the sun. Usually there's 3 layers, okay. You have the red, so usually after the sun sets, you see red in the sky, in the horizon, okay. And above the red is yellow color or layer, okay. And then you see the white color or layer of horizon, okay. So as soon as the sun sets, Maghrib has started, okay. And then you have the red twilight, as they call it, in the horizon. Okay, you see it red, the sky is red. Now, bit by bit, this red horizon will disappear as well. Okay, so as the sun goes down, this red twilight will disappear as well. Okay, so as soon as this red twilight disappears and you have the yellow, that's when Isha starts. Okay, does that make sense? So you have the sun disappearing, right? It's Maghrib. Okay, it's Maghrib, but you still have lights in the horizon, right? Right. If you look at the ocean, okay, inshallah after this, look up a good video of the sun setting. You see a red layer or red color in the horizon. That slowly will disappear. Once the red layer completely disappears and you see yellow, it becomes yellowish. That's when Maghrib finishes and Isha starts. Okay, is understood? This requires experiments. We need to go out, to the beach or somewhere, inshallah. Look at nature and actually, experience these things with our eyes, inshallah.
So how long roughly if you're talking about time then?
Between Maghrib and Isha. The scholars, they mentioned around, it depends on the area, obviously. Depends like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Like, depends on areas again. Like some places, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
If you look in the science of Falak, they use darajat, every darajat. But that's anyway, it depends on every place is different. Okay, every place is different. As long as this disappears, the time of Isha has entered and Maghrib has finished, which is roughly an hour and a half. If you look throughout the year calendar, if you have a Salah timetable, okay. Wallahu a'lam.
So when Maghrib finish, then Isha straight away starts.
Yes. So all of the Salah from Dhuhr is connected. Dhuhr finishes, Asr starts. Asr finishes, Maghrib starts. Maghrib finishes, Isha starts. Okay. So Isha, when does Isha start?
When does Isha start?
When does Isha time start? When the red twilight disappears.
Yeah.
Okay. When the red twilight disappears. So that's when Isha starts. Here he mentions in the book, yes, the red twilight to set for Isha. So that's when Isha starts. When does Isha finish? Does anyone know?
When Fajr starts.
When Fajr starts. Okay. So again, it's connected. Isha until Fajr is connected. Okay. Now, when does Fajr start? That's another question. When does Fajr start? Does anyone know when Fajr start? So this is the hardest, prayer out of the 5 prayers, to know when it starts, compared to Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. Because you have here, the author, if you see, he says the true Fajr, Al-Fajr al-Sadiq, the true Fajr, because there's the fake Fajr, or the Fajr al-Kadhib. So there's 2 types of Fajr. So what is the fake Fajr and the true Fajr? So again, this requires, you need to go into the mountains, to the hills where it's clear, there's no city, lights and all of this, okay? So usually if you hike a mountain or a hill, you can see, right, if you go up before Fajr, it's dark, right, pitch black. And then you'll see something like this in the middle of the sky, like a light, okay, coming up. It appears and then disappears, appears, disappears. That's the fake Fajr. That's the fake Fajr, okay? And then later on, after the time passes, you'll see a light. So this is vertically, right? And then you see light horizontally. So you see light horizontally, like this. As time goes, you'll get wider, 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 wider until sunrise. Does that make sense? Again, this requires a video, inshallah. We need to watch some videos on how the sun works, how it appears, Fajr appears. Okay, so the fake Fajr is vertically. Okay, it appears and disappears. So these are the 2 differences. Okay, number 1 is the fake Fajr is vertically, and the true Fajr is horizontally. You see a light. The second difference between the true and fake Fajr is the fake Fajr appears and disappears. Okay. The true Fajr, however, once it appears, it will increase. So it's a thin line of light, and then it will increase until sunrise. So I advise everyone, inshallah, to look on some videos on how this happens. Right, inshallah ta'ala. As I said again, it's very hard to spot. It's not easy. Okay, so this is why a lot of problems happen when it comes to Fajr prayer, the time for Fajr prayer. So that's when Fajr starts and Isha finishes. Okay. So as we mentioned, this is the fake Fajr, right? There is no Islamic ruling related to the fake Fajr. So the Fajr does not start, the Fajr prayer does not start, and the fasting does not start. When does the fasting start and the Fajr prayer become obligatory? When the true Fajr appears. Okay. Now, when does Fajr finish? Sunrise. So when the sun itself starts to appear, when it starts to appear, it comes up, that's when Fajr finishes. Okay. This is understood, inshallah. So this is briefly the 5 times of Salah. So as we see, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr are all interconnected. Okay, the time of Salah is connected. Once this finishes, this next one enters. The only gap is between Fajr and Dhuhr. So after sunrise, Fajr finishes, and then there is no obligatory prayer all the way until Dhuhr. Okay, so that's the only gap between the obligatory prayers. Is there any questions, inshallah, before we move on? Yeah, inshallah, it's straightforward. But like I said, this is probably none of us done this before. Inshallah, it requires experiments. Tomorrow try to check Dhuhr by yourself. If it's sunny, inshallah, clear. Asr, Maghrib, again, it's also a bit hard. You need to make sure there's no buildings. So the best place to go is the beach, or maybe a clear surface like the hills or mountains, where you can see the sun setting and also the time for Isha and the time for Fajr. Right?
If there's clouds, is it that you have to wait until the sun?
Yes, that's a good question. So to pray, we must know that the time of Salah has entered by seeing one of these. Okay. If we see one of these, then we are 100% sure that the time of Salah has entered. Okay, then we can pray. However, today we don't see the sun. We just look at our watches or the Google. Okay, it's time for Salah. Okay, if we have a reliable source, for example, the Google, that we use, or Salah times, or we live in a Muslim area, like in Muslim countries, we hear the adhan going around. That means what? The time of Salah is entered, even though we didn't see by ourselves the sun. Okay, that we can say is like 80%. We are sure the time of Salah has entered. Ijtihad, al-dhan bil ijtihad, okay, as they say in Arabic. So when we are sure that time has entered, even though we're not 100% sure, we didn't see the sun, but because we hear, for example, the rooster for Fajr, if we know that this rooster does not make any sound except that it's Fajr time, or the watches, the time that we have, or the adhan that happens in the community, Muslim community, for example. Or for example, if someone says, usually after Maghrib, for example, I read 2 juz, for example, 2 juz, or I eat a plate, right, of rice, for example. And then every time I finish eating or reading the 2 juz, Isha comes in because I have my watch. And then one day, my watch is broken, right? After Maghrib prayer, if you eat or if you read 2 juz of the Quran, which usually the time of Isha has entered, you can then pray Isha afterwards, because you have proof or something that you rely upon that the time has entered. Okay, so praying is, you need one of these two. Either you're 100% sure the time has entered by the signs that we have mentioned, or 80-70% you have something that you rely upon. Therefore, we understand that if someone says, could be the time of prayer, I don't know, without any relying on anything, just praying, this is impermissible. Okay, this is impermissible. Even if later on you found out I prayed on time, it's invalid. You must repeat the prayer, because you did not know for sure that it was the time of prayer. You prayed without knowing the time. Okay, as the author here mentioned in the last paragraph, he says, therefore Salah is obligatory at these times. Okay, and performing them before or after the time is a major sin and a very bad act. Okay, the author says, Akbarul Ma'asi, Akbar al-Ma'asi is from the major sins to pray before or after the time. So someone says, why can't I pray 5 minutes before time of Salah? No, you can't. The time of Salah is as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put for the Muslims. Okay, is there any question on this one, inshallah?
So if when the azan is going on, can someone start praying, or they have to wait till the azan ends?
No, they can start.
Yeah.
Okay, if obviously if the adhan should be made when the time has entered, they start the adhan. And this is why very important that muaddin should know the times of prayer, right? Because this is amana, as we learn, when a woman's menstruation finishes or starts, this all depends on the adhan, and this is why the adhan is a very big responsibility. It's not a game, right? The adhan is a very amana. It's a very big amana, and the scholars have mentioned conditions for a person who can be a muaddin and not. Right? It has to be trustworthy, for example. Because if he makes the adhan before the time, that's a big problem. And people pray before the time. Right? That's a big, big problem. Right? But that's why the adhan made once the time enters. Meaning, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar, khalas, pray. You can pray without waiting the time or the adhan to finish. Even though it's better to listen to the adhan, finish, respond, and then start praying. Allah Akbar. Any other question? Okay, inshallah ta'ala. That's for the third condition of Salah, which is the time of Salah. And then the fourth condition of Salah, the author rahimahullah, he says to cover. So he said here to cover the awrah. Okay, to cover the awrah. First, someone might say, what is the awrah? Awrah is an Arabic word, so what does that mean? Basically, awrah means aib, or not something that is a defect, awrah, something like that. Okay. Now, when the scholars talk about awrah, there's two meanings, you can say. Number one is the awrah that must be covered. Okay, when we say awrah, this is an awrah, meaning that you have to cover it. Or they could mean by awrah something that you cannot look at. It's impermissible to look at. Okay, these are two meanings of awrah. Okay, in the chapter of Salah, usually here they talk about the awrah that must be covered. Okay, when we say the awrah in Salah, meaning the parts that you must cover in Salah. However, in the book of Nikah, the book of marriage, for example, when they talk about awrah, they mention what you can look at and what you cannot look at, okay, from the opposite gender. Now, so here he's talking about awrah. We need to understand that which must be covered. Okay, that which must be covered during the Salah, from the beginning to the end of the Salah. So obviously the awrah would be different. Men and women have different awrah. And as I mentioned, here awrah in the salah, because awrah outside the salah is different. Okay, and it depends the awrah with mahram or non-mahram. All of this is different outside the salah. Here, specifically for salah. Okay, please do not take this out of context and say this awrah outside the salah as well. Okay, so he says here, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy upon him, to cover between a man's navel and knee. So the awrah of a man, the area that a man must cover is between. This very important word, between the navel and knee. Okay, meaning that the knee itself and the navel itself is not an awrah. The navel itself and the knee itself is not. Between them, ma bayna surra wal rukbah. Right, as scholars mentioned, between them is an awrah. The knee itself is not an awrah. The navel itself is not an awrah. Okay. However, we'll mention this later on when the author mentions it. So that's for men. Okay, between the navel and the knees, one must cover it during salah. And then for a woman, he says, and a woman's entire body, except for her face and hands. So a woman during salah must cover the entire body except for the face and hands. The face and hands. Again, this is during salah. Okay, very important to note. Not the awrah outside salah. And then he says, and it is obligatory upon her, meaning the woman, to cover a part of her face and hands from all sides. So if you remember previously in wudu, we mentioned the area of the face. Okay, we mentioned the face. And then we mentioned that you must wash a part of the head and a part of the ear and a part of the chin. Why? To make sure that you actually wash the whole thing. Yeah, as the scholars mentioned, مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ وَاجِبٌ. When you want to complete something that is obligatory, then the requirements to complete that obligatory becomes obligatory as well. So you want to pray. From the requirements of prayer is wudu. So you have to make wudu if you want to make salah. Right? So if you want to wash the face, you have to wash a part over it to make sure. Likewise here, we mentioned that woman must reveal the hand end. So when we say hand, obviously from the wrist to the tips of fingers. And the face, as we mentioned in wudu as well. So therefore, cover a part of her face and hands from all sides. So she must reveal the hands right from the wrist. However, she must also cover a part from the hand, a little bit above. Okay, and the face, a little bit from the face must be covered. Because why? If a person covers right on the hairline or the face, maybe it's revealed a little bit, right? If the sleeve is right on here, the wrist might get revealed a little bit. So the scholars mentioned that you must add a little bit. This is very important, right? Make sure the hair of the woman is covered, right? And etc. And then he says, and upon a man to cover a part of his navel and that which is parallel with it, and the sides of his knees as well. So now, when it comes to the man, okay, so we mentioned the awrah of a man in salah is between the navel and the knee. Now, what about the knee and the navel itself? Do we have to cover it? The author here, he says, and upon a man to cover a part, okay, a portion, a little bit of his navel and that which is parallel with it. So, under the navel, that's where the awrah starts. A person must cover bits from the navel, from all sides, okay, that which is parallel with it, and the sides of his knees. So the knees itself is not an awrah, as we mentioned, but a person must cover a part of it. Because especially when a person goes for sujood, etc., it will be revealed. Okay, and if a part of the awrah is revealed, right, and the person does not cover it straight away, the salah is batil, it's invalid. Okay, so this is why it's very important to cover the awrah. Obviously, as we mentioned, this is the minimum. No doubt, it's best to cover the head. For the men to cover, wear whatever thawb or sarung or whatever you have to dress in the best manner in salah. But this is the minimum. Okay. And then he says, and upon them is to cover from all sides, not underneath. So what does this mean? Not underneath. To cover from all sides, not underneath. So if we imagine someone, he's wearing, for example, a sarung, izar, or he's wearing a thawb, right, the long, dress that or men also wear in salah, and he's wearing nothing else underneath, and he's praying on the second floor, right? And if someone accidentally looks up and he can see his awrah, his salah valid? Can we say he's not covering his awrah? No, his salah is valid, yeah? Is it? No. Why not? Is the salah valid? Huh? From? Yes. Salah valid or not? Not valid, yeah. So
Not
pay attention to
okay.
Yes.
It's valid.
valid, yeah?
Because it's underneath.
Okay,
It's
so
not
pay attention what the author says. It is upon them to cover the awrah from all sides, not except underneath. So you have to cover your awrah from above. Person cannot see awrah from above, from sides. But if someone can see from underneath, his salah is still valid. Does that make sense? So if someone now is praying like this, they're wearing this, and they go for sujood, usually if you sit a bit back,
Yeah.
you can see the awrah
Yeah.
from the back.
Yeah.
So does that mean this person's salah is invalid? Can we say that?
But that's
No.
from the side.
No, that's from underneath.
Underneath.
Underneath the person. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So these the ulama, they are very detailed, okay? They are very detailed, they mention this. So all sides, not underneath. So if you can see a person's awrah from underneath, the salah is still valid. Because he did what is obligatory upon him to cover his awrah. Except from underneath, how are you going to cover underneath the awrah? Right? Does that make sense? Salah is still valid.
Why is it like that?
Why is it like that?
Yeah.
Because how are you going to cover from underneath? From all sides. Okay. So, I mean, how do I say this? Someone's praying on the second floor and you can see the awrah from underneath. Can we say the salah is invalid? How can we say the salah is invalid? They're wearing a clothes that covers their awrah. Right, underneath you don't have to cover it. Okay, because you're walking here, you have to cover it from underneath as well. Like this, make sure no one can see from underneath. Right, so that's common sense basically, right? It's common sense. So you cover it from all sides except underneath. Okay, so if someone can see from underneath, it doesn't invalidate your salah. Does that make sense? Because, you know, everyone wearing pants, for example, there might be a hole from underneath, obviously, where you put your feet in. There's a hole in there, someone might see your awrah through it. So it doesn't invalidate the salah. Right? Yeah, that's common sense, basically. Right? It's common sense. But it's important because someone might say, I can see his awrah, he's making sujood there. When he does sujood, I can see through his, you know, his thawb or his izar, sarung. You can see from the back his knee or whatever his awrah, for example, or someone in the second floor. Right? Is salah valid or not? Okay. This is just for our knowledge, you know, so we know the salah is valid. Anyway, this is what happens when we read these kind of books. Wallah. And then he says, and the veil must prevent the skin color from being visible. Okay, so now we must cover the awrah, okay? But the author, he says, the veil or the covering of the awrah that we used to cover must prevent the skin color from being visible. So when is it considered that we have covered the awrah? Is that when the skin becomes invisible, we can't see it. Sorry, it's not visible. Yeah, we can't see through the clothing. We can't see the skin color. Meaning, if someone wears white pants, for example, unfortunately we can see the skin color of his thighs, for example, through the pants. This is invalid. You can see through to the skin color. And this is something that we see with women clothing usually. I don't know what you call it. Like usually they have a skirt and the one on top. Usually it's white so that you can see the hair or the woman or the skin, right? Because it's white and you know you can see through. Unfortunately, this invalidates the prayer. Unfortunately, right? So one must wear clothes or a veil that prevents the skin color. That's a requirement. Okay. Now someone asks, okay, what if I wear clothes that prevents the skin color but it's tight? Like jeans, tight jeans, for example. If a person, or man or woman, wears that for salah, is the salah valid or not? It's not valid. Why?
You cannot see.
Is it valid or not?
No, because the aura said that it's something that you need to cover. Right?
Yes, so the skin is not seen. Okay, we can't see the skin color because it's jeans, it's thick, but we can see the skin shape, or the body shape because it's tight. Is the salah valid or not? You're talking about valid or not? We're not talking about is it recommended or disliked. Is the salah
I
valid?
think
Or
it's valid.
it's valid. Okay, why? Because the condition is that you cover the skin color.
Yeah.
So if it shows the body shape, that does not invalidate the prayer. Even though some scholars do say, however, the Shafi'i school is that it's still valid, even though it's very, very disliked, especially for women. Right? Remember, here we're talking about what validates and invalidates the prayer. So we know when we say your prayer is invalid, you must repeat your prayer. Or we know for ourselves, okay? So, is that understood, inshallah? Sometimes something doesn't invalidate the prayer, but we tell other people to repeat your prayer, and this, and a fight happens, and because unfortunately we did not know the proper knowledge, right? So that's a very important note, to differentiate between the issue of covering the skin color and the body shape. And then last paragraph he says, and for the veil to be clothes or not clothes. Basically this means that a person covers the skin, right, with clothes that we wear normally, or non-clothes. For example, a person uses a leaf to cover his aura, that's permissible. He uses clay, for example. There's no clothing, there's no leaf, nothing but clay. If he sticks on clay on his aura to cover it, it covers the skin color, the salah is valid, right? And this is something that the scholars mention. I don't know where they got it from, but they mention, subhanAllah, very, very rare situations. And he says, therefore, darkness or a small tent is insufficient. So if someone says, I don't have clothes on, I'm not covering my aura, but I'm praying in the darkness, no one can see my aura, is the salah valid? You must put on something that, either clay or leaf or actual clothing. Darkness to cover the aura is not enough. Or he said here, a small tent where no one can see you, that's insufficient. Okay? Should we keep going? Or is there anyone?
Okay.
Nice. If everyone's still okay, we'll keep going, inshallah. We'll finish when we'll finish.
Yeah.
Okay.
One more.
So I'll try to finish this page, inshallah.
Yep.
So quickly, the author, rahimahullah, he moves on to the fifth condition of salah, and that is to face the qibla. Now we mentioned what qibla here means. Okay, he says to face the qibla. So the qibla basically is the Kaaba itself. Okay, the direction that we must face during salah. Okay. He says with the chest while standing and sitting. So facing the qibla must be done with the chest. From here we understand that if a person in prayer looks right, they divert from the qibla with their face. Is the salah still valid?
Yes.
Yes. So if a person looks right and left in salah, the salah is still valid. Okay. Obviously, if with no necessity, it's disliked, right? But if there's a necessity, it is permissible. With the chest. So if a person is praying and then they divert with their chest, then the salah is. Some people, they walk right and left during salah, and then they divert their chest. That's a problem, right? Diverted the chest from the qibla invalidates the prayer. Okay. While standing or sitting. Okay, so this is the case when you're praying while standing or sitting on a chair or on the ground. And then he says, and to face it with both shoulders and most of the body in other than the two previous conditions. Now, what does this mean? So if someone, for example, is paralyzed or they're in the hospital, they're on the bed, they cannot sit down, they cannot stand up to pray. Okay. Obviously, they have to pray if they still have sanity, they're Muslim, and etc. As we mentioned, the four conditions. Then how do they face the qibla? The author here, he says, with both shoulders and most of the body. Meaning that if they're on the bed like this, the head is here, at least they put a pillow or they lift the bed. I think they have the remotes usually come up like this, and the shoulders face the qibla. Okay, and they pray facing the qibla. And they're lying down on the bed. Okay, so the back or the head and the shoulders come up a bit, put a pillow or something until they can face the qibla. Okay, inshallah. Okay, and then he says, except if there is heavy fear. Okay, so we understand that every Muslim must pray facing the qibla. The qibla. If someone says, I don't know where the qibla is, but I'm just going to pray, the salah is invalid. Okay, the salah is invalid, and they must repeat again. So you have to ask someone or use a compass that you usually have on your phones. Or if you come to a masjid, for example, you see the qibla is that way, you pray straight away, facing that way, no problem. But if without ijtihad, without looking something to rely upon, a compass or something, I'll just pray this way, and salah is invalid. Okay, just like the times of salah. However, there's two exceptions when you cannot face the qibla. Okay, and it's very interesting. And it says, except if there is heavy fear and it is impossible to face the qibla. Heavy fear, for example, in battle, as Allah mentioned in the Quran, فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا, right? In battle, on the battlefield, back in the days, especially swinging the sword, you're on a horse, takes hours, right? If the time of salah comes, you can't say, I'm going to pray later after the battlefield if I'm alive, inshallah, right? And the scholars, interestingly, they also mention the harib, the one who's running away. If you're escaping, for example, if there's a bushfire, for example, and you're running away, if you stop, you're going to get burnt in the fire. So you need to run. If it's time for salah, you pray while running, while moving, even though not facing the qibla. If you're being chased by a lion, for example, and it's time for salah, about to finish, you haven't prayed, you face even though you're not facing the qibla. And this shows that a Muslim can never leave the salah. Even though he's being chased by an animal, he's in the battlefield, then how can our work and studies be an excuse for him? Right? So this is very important.
What if you're on a plane or on a ship?
Yes, that's very good. Inshallah. So we'll talk about that after this, inshallah. So that's the first exception. When there is heavy fear, a person can pray without facing the qibla. Okay, and then he said here, then he shall pray however possible without the need to repeat. Okay, now the second exception, which the author didn't mention, but we'll mention quickly, add, because I believe it's important, is that if someone is praying a sunnah prayer, okay, it's sunnah prayer or voluntary prayer, and number 2, during traveling. So these are the 2 conditions. Okay, the second exception, where you can pray without facing the qibla if you are traveling, and it is a voluntary prayer. It could be witr prayer, if you believe it's voluntary, or duha prayer, or whatever sunnah prayer there is. Okay, from this we understand that if you are traveling, you cannot divert from the qibla if you are praying a mandatory prayer. Okay, what if I'm on the plane, if I'm on a train, on a bus, for example, bus is traveling 2 days, for example, then let's take the example of a plane, right? This usually happens. So what you do is, as the scholars mentioned, if one of the conditions of salah are not met, okay, we talked about purification, we talked about wudu. What if someone does not find water for wudu? He does not find soil for tayammum. Does he pray or not? He prays. Likewise, if any of the conditions of salah are not met, meaning that you don't find water for wudu, and you cannot know where the qibla is, you cannot stand up for the obligatory prayer, which is also a condition as will come. If any of the conditions for the validity of salah is not met because you can't do it, then you have to pray. You have to pray on time. So in the plane, for example, you're in the plane, Dhuhr, for example, or let's say Fajr is short, right? You can't combine with another prayer. You're on the plane, Fajr, you're going to land 8 o'clock in the morning. What you do is, you pray on the plane, to your ability, because it's time for prayer. Muslim can never let the time pass without praying. Once you land, you repeat the prayer with completing the conditions of salah. Right? The scholars mention someone is in prison, they can't make wudu, they don't know where the qibla is, anything. Then they pray, they must pray. Once they are released, then they pray and make up for the prayers that were missed. Does that make sense? So whenever any of the conditions of salah, once again, cannot be met, a Muslim must pray on time. And then later on, when he can remove the najis, he can make wudu, he can face the qibla properly, then he makes up, repeats the prayer. Inshallah. Is that understood? Inshallah.
If you're traveling, let's say 18 hours on flight, in the air, you don't know what time is Fajr, what time is Zuhr, because you pass very quickly from one country to another country.
Yes,
so how do you gauge
yes, so
the time?
Yeah. So as we mentioned, so 80%, the one, 80, 70%. So you look, for example, maybe you can ask, what's the local time, for example? What is it called? The people on the plane. Yeah. Or some people might have apps, for example, before they fly, they check the time. Yani, more or less, you guess, yani, more or less, you look, you can open the window, for example, you try your best to get the time of salah. Does that make sense? And if you're traveling, if it's Dhuhr and Asr, the time is long. Dhuhr and Asr combined, Maghrib and Isha combined, right? You have from Maghrib all the way till Fajr, right? So you gauge it like, more or less, you try your best to get the salah on time. And then once you land, you pray facing the qibla with the conditions, met, inshallah. Allahu A'lam. Okay.
So just to clarify, so when you do salah in the aeroplane, then you need to repeat it
Yes, afterwards.
afterwards?
Once, because you didn't fulfill the conditions, for example, facing the qibla. For example, in obligatory prayer, you must pray while standing, if you are able to, unless you are sick. Okay? Even the scholars mention, if you can stand with a stick, you have to stand with a stick in salah. It's obligatory prayer, not sunnah prayer. Therefore, in the plane, we're sitting. We can't stand where we're going to stand. Okay. So therefore, you have to pray. It's the time of prayer. You can't leave without the time passing by without salah. You pray. Once you are able to fulfill the conditions, standing, facing the qibla, wudu, then you repeat the prayer. Okay. Allah. Okay. This might be new for some people, right? This took me time as well to realize afterwards. Khair, inshallah. So that's the fifth condition of salah, of the condition of salah. Quickly, number 6, he says the one praying must be Muslim. So we mentioned that being a Muslim is on condition for the salah to be obligatory. Okay, salah is not obligatory upon the kafir, non-Muslim. So you must be a Muslim for the salah to be mandatory and for the salah to be valid. If a kafir, a disbeliever prays, the salah is not considered salah. It's not. Okay, so there's no reward for that, etc. And then quickly, number 7, we'll finish off with this, inshallah ta'ala. He says the one praying must have sanity. Again, sanity, we mentioned that where conditions for salah to be obligatory. Okay, someone who's crazy, salah is not obligatory for him. Okay, here it is also a condition for the salah to be valid. Okay, so if someone who's crazy, for example, prays, salah is not considered. Okay, it's not valid.
Same goes for mental illness.
Sorry?
Same goes for mental illness.
I'm not sure what type of mental illness.
Let's say psychosis.
I'm sure. So basically, sanity. It's sanity. Okay, as long as a person has sanity, they can think. Okay, even if they're paralyzed, they can't move. They have to pray. But someone who's crazy, for example, they have no sanity. They can't think, basically, right? So therefore, salah is not obligatory. As long as a person has sanity, right, their mind is there, they have to pray. And then he says, therefore, the salah is not obligatory upon the crazy and the child who is not mumayyiz, nor is it valid from them both. Okay, so someone who's crazy, salah is not obligatory and the salah is not valid. And then he says the child who isn't mumayyiz. So we'll finish off with this, inshallah ta'ala. Quick table. We have baligh, right? We talked about baligh. What does baligh mean? Does anyone know?
When someone reaches puberty.
Puberty. Yes, excellent. So baligh, basically, when someone reaches puberty, but we didn't mention the signs of puberty because of time. But basically, when someone is baligh, and then we have another terminology, which is mumayyiz. I believe it's in the book as well. Explain mumayyiz is. Okay. So baligh, we know what that is. Mumayyiz is basically when a child is born, they don't know how to eat by themselves or go to the toilet. They don't differentiate between a $50 note and a $100 note. Right? If you give them both, they'll probably take the $50 note if the color looks better to them, right? But someone who's mumayyiz, when a child reaches the age, they know the 100 note is more valuable than the 50 note. Does that make sense? So they're mumayyiz, they know how to eat, how to grab a spoon, they know how to go to the toilet. That's mumayyiz. Okay. So a person could be mumayyiz when they're 4 years old, for example, 5 years old, but they're not baligh. So mumayyiz is like under baligh. Okay. Now, if someone is not baligh and is not mumayyiz yet, is the salah valid? No. If they pray, no. Is the salah mandatory? No. Okay. If a child is not baligh, but he is mumayyiz, alright, he's not baligh yet, he hasn't reached puberty, but he knows, how to eat, how to go to the toilet, etc. Is the salah valid from the mumayyiz? Yes. Salah. Okay. If he prays properly according to the conditions and the pillars, etc., he'll be rewarded for that. Okay. There will be written a reward for that, even though it's not mandatory to pray yet. Okay. Now, if someone obviously is valid, then there will be mumayyiz, the salah will be valid, and it's mandatory to pray. Okay. Obviously, a person can't be valid and not mumayyiz. So this is a quick table on بالغ مميز in Salah is valid or mandatory. Wallahu a'lam. Any questions on what we have mentioned so far? Alhamdulillah, today we went a bit long. Alhamdulillah. But hopefully, inshallah, tomorrow we will finish the conditions of Salah and we will go through the pillars of Salah, inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu a'lam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for beneficial knowledge, the ability to act upon this knowledge and to make this an argument for us, not against us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant swift aid and victory to our brothers and sisters all around the world, especially those who are in the blessed lands of Bayt al-Maqdis. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.